In 1994, Capcom released a game that combined two of the most popular things of the time, fighting games and mutant heroes with X-Men Children of the Atom. Having a game where you could see your favorite X-Men heroes and villains duke it out, especially Wolverine vs. Cyclops, was not only fun as hell, but helped establish Capcom's Versus series, starting with X-Men vs. Street Fighter. But even with that series' success, there was still a longing for another solo X-Men brawl fest. Enter 2000's X-Men Mutant Academy for the original PlayStation, that was released to coincide with the first film. It looked more like a Tekken, but still played like a Street Fighter game, and was surprisingly fun. It did well enough to produce a sequel a year later that improved most of the complaints from the first game, and even included Spider-Man and Professor X as playable characters. So when it came time for the new generation of consoles to hit the scene, our favorite heroes came out fists flying and claws swinging with the final installment of the Mutant Academy trilogy, X-Men Next Dimension. Now, when I mentioned the first two Mutant Academies, I didn't talk about their stories, and for good reason. They really didn't have one, just standard arcade and versus modes. Next Dimension, however, does have a story mode where it essentially boils down to this. Prime Sentinels recover the head of Bastion, who wants to wipe out mutant kind. To do this, he kidnaps Forge, who can construct any machine he can imagine, to build a weapon capable of wiping them out. Thus, the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants must form a temporary alliance to defeat this greater foe. For a fighting game, the story's pretty good, especially considering the plot is loosely based on the story Operation Zero Tolerance. It's a solid good and evil versus bigger evil plot with something I wasn't expecting, multiple endings. Now, I won't spoil it here, but I'll give you a tip. In story mode, try to defeat Bastion as Magneto in the final fight for the good ending.
Leave the fighting to those who can.
Following the previous two in the trilogy, Next Dimension is a 3D fighter where it's all about getting those KOs, using your character's skills and abilities to your advantage. You have your standard moves, special moves, combos, juggling, counters, and hyper moves to perform. Basically, if you've played a Capcom fighting game, you'll fit right in with Next Dimension, even more so with its decent controls, even if the 3D dodging is a bit spotty. Besides story mode, which chooses the characters for you to play, you have arcade, survival, versus, and practice modes, where you can choose from 25 characters. Well, 24 on other systems, as Pyro is exclusive to the Big Green, but also fan favorites as Wolverine, Cyclops, Gambit, Magneto, and more, ready to beat each other senseless. Now, being a 3D fighter, you would expect those particular moments in that type of game that just really piss you off to be in Next Dimension. And you know what? You're right, they're totally there. Like most fighters, the AI is cheap as hell, leading to fights that last much longer than they should. I spent almost an hour and a half on Bastion alone before I finally beat him. Plus, in story mode, there are more of these time fights where you have to defeat the enemy in 50 seconds or it's an automatic lose, even if you have more health than them. A pain in the ass mechanic that makes no sense and shouldn't be in a fighting game ever. One thing Next Dimension does pretty well is its visuals. The character models represent their appearance in the comics very nicely, with a dash of the films thrown in for good measure. Even the levels are impressive looking, showcasing different locales like the X-Mansion, Danger Room, and Savage Land to name a few, complete with interactive spots a la Dead or Alive. On the audio side, the music is your basic orchestrated fare, and it's nothing really special. Hell, I started to listen to other music during playing the game after a while. The voiceover, though, is really good, with the standout being Patrick Stewart reprising the role he was born to play, Professor Xavier.
Improvisation, anticipation, and trust. Well done, X-Men. Storm, Wolverine, Phoenix, Rogue. You are all just in time. For this next exercise, we will break you up into pairs. The idea of this exercise is to combat an opponent that places you at somewhat of a disadvantage. To claim victory, you will have to improvise, adapt, and eventually overcome.
So that's X-Men Next Dimension, and I'm kind of split on it. As a fighting game, it's not bad, but there are other better fighting games to play on the big green. But as an X-Men game, it's the best one I've reviewed so far. But then again, X3 and Wolverine's Revenge are two totally different games, so you can't really go on that basis alone. But that's just my opinion. Overall though, Next Dimension is totally worth it. Sadly though, this would be the end of the Mutant Academy series, and as far as we know, any fighting games just starting the X-Men by themselves. Now don't get me wrong, I enjoy the Capcom Versus series as much as the next guy, but I don't know. I think it'd be nice to go back and have a solo X-Men Brawl Fest. With that, this is the Dolly Paka. Thanks for watching and stay green.